What if the person who always says I'm working isn't actually working at all? Stay until the end. Because one small detail in an ordinary phone call changed everything she believed about love. Eloria used to smile every time her phone lit up with Caden's name. At the beginning of their relationship, his calls could last for hours. They talked about ordinary things, how the day went, what they wanted to do in the future, small jokes that only the two of them understood. Even when work became busy, he still found time to send voice messages, ask if she had eaten, and remind her not to stay up too late. Those little moments made her believe that no matter how hard life became, they would always make time for each other. But slowly, something changed. At first it was so small that she convinced herself she was imagining it. His replies became shorter, his calls ended faster. Instead of asking about her day, he began saying things like, "I'm in a meeting, I'll call you later," or "Work is crazy right now." She understood. Everyone gets busy, everyone has difficult weeks, so she didn't complain. When she sent a long message, he answered with one sentence. When she called at night, he often declined and sent a text saying he would call back. Sometimes he never did. When she asked if everything was okay, he always replied with the same calm voice, "You're overthinking. I'm just tired." That answer became familiar. Days turned into weeks. One evening, Eloria prepared dinner and thought it would be nice to eat while talking to him like they used to. She called. No answer. 10 minutes later, a message appeared, "Still working." She looked at the screen and smiled weakly. An hour later she sent another message. "How much longer?" No response. 2 hours later. "Sorry, busy," that was all. She stared at the 3 words for a long time. It wasn't anger she felt, it was something harder to explain. She missed him while he was technically still in her life. The next few days followed the same pattern. Calls became shorter than ever. "Hey, hi, how was your day?" "Fine. What are you doing work?" Then silence. It felt strange. Not because he was unavailable, but because he no longer seemed interested in being present. One night she finally asked softly, "Do you still enjoy talking to me?" There was a pause, then a small laugh. "Why would you ask that? I don't know. You seem far away. You're thinking too much." Again. Always the same answer. She wanted to believe him. She told herself relationships go through phases. Adults get stressed. Work becomes overwhelming. She reminded herself not to become controlling, not to create problems that didn't exist. But the feeling remained. Then came the phone call she couldn't forget. It was late. He answered unexpectedly. His voice sounded lower than usual. She smiled immediately. "You finally picked up." "Yeah, I don't have much time." Something about the background noise caught her attention. It wasn't office noise, no keyboards, no distant conversations. Instead she heard soft music. And then a laugh. A woman's laugh. Very quick. Very quiet. But impossible to ignore. Her heart paused. She didn't say anything. "Where are you?" she asked. "At work." The answer came too quickly. She looked at the dark screen in front of her and listened carefully. Music. Movement. Then silence. Before she could speak again, he said, "I have to go." The call ended. Eloria stayed still for a long moment. She wanted to tell herself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe someone nearby was watching videos. Maybe she heard wrong. Maybe she was tired. But for the first time she didn't feel sad. She felt uncertain. And uncertainty can be louder than truth. That night she opened their old messages and scrolled back for months. Long conversations had become short replies. Long calls had become excuses. Warm attention had become routine distance. She closed the phone. For the first time she didn't wait for his message, because deep inside a question had already appeared. If work was really taking all his time, then why did it feel like someone else was receiving the version of him she used to know? Watch until the end of this story, because what Eloria discovers next will reveal whether her fears were wrong, or whether the truth had been hidden behind the word busy all along. He said he had urgent work again, but when she checked, nobody at the office had seen him all day. That was the moment Eloria realized she wasn't losing him to work, she might be losing him to a secret. Eloria tried to forget the strange phone call from the night before. She told herself she had no proof, no reason to turn suspicion into accusations. Relationships needed trust, and she didn't want to become someone who questioned every delayed reply or every canceled plan. So the next morning, she acted normally. She sent Caden a short message, wishing him a productive day. Hours later, he replied, with a simple sentence, "Busy today. Talk later." Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. But somehow those words no longer felt reassuring. They felt rehearsed. Over the next several days, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time she suggested meeting, he already had a reason ready. A meeting. Extra work. Last-minute deadlines. A client emergency. The explanations changed. But the result never did. He disappeared. Weekends used to belong to them. They had traditions, long walks, meals together, late conversations. Now weekends felt emptier than weekdays. One Saturday morning she asked if he wanted to spend the evening together. He answered almost instantly, "Can't. Emergency project." She looked at the message for a while before replying, "Okay, good luck." He reacted with a thumbs up, nothing more. Hours passed. She tried distracting herself with movies, cleaning, music. But the silence kept returning. Late in the afternoon she opened social media, absent-mindedly. She wasn't searching for anything. Then she noticed something strange. A mutual acquaintance had uploaded a casual group photo from a cafe across town. It wasn't even related to Caden. But in the background, blurred and partly hidden, someone looked familiar. Same posture, same jacket. Her breathing slowed. She zoomed in. Too blurry to be certain. She immediately put the phone down and laughed at herself. This was ridiculous. People wear similar clothes. She refused to become paranoid. Yet the image stayed in her mind. That evening she called him. No answer. She waited. After an hour, a message appeared. Still at work. She typed and deleted several responses before sending only one. Hope everything goes well. Minutes later he replied, "Thanks." No call. No details. No conversation. Just enough attention to keep distance polite. The next day felt stranger. She asked casually, "How did the project go?" He paused before answering. "Long day. Didn't leave until late." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Then she asked, "Were many people there?" Another pause. "Yeah. Whole team." Something inside her became quiet. Not angry, not dramatic, just quiet. Because she suddenly realized something uncomfortable. She had started preparing her questions carefully, not to understand him, but to avoid making him uncomfortable. Later that week she met someone who knew his workplace. The conversation had nothing to do with him at first. Then casually she mentioned, "Seems like everyone's overloaded lately." The person looked confused. "Actually, this week has been pretty normal." She smiled immediately and changed the subject. She didn't ask more. She didn't want details. She went home carrying silence instead. That night she sat with her phone in her hand and scrolled through old photos. There he was, smiling openly, sending random pictures, making time. She noticed something she had ignored before. The disappearing hadn't started suddenly. It had happened little by little. Less effort, shorter replies, fewer plans, less presence, until absence became normal. Then her screen lit up. A message from Caden. "Sorry, busy again tonight." She stared at the words. No explanation. No apology beyond habit. She typed okay, but she didn't send it. Instead she asked, "Do you ever miss me?" Several minutes passed. Then his reply arrived. "Why are you asking weird questions lately?" She looked at the screen and realized something painful. He hadn't answered. She locked the phone. For the first time she stopped trying to prove she was understanding. She stopped trying to convince herself that distance always meant stress. Because people who care may become busy, but they rarely disappear without leaving space behind. And suddenly she wasn't afraid of discovering the truth anymore. She was afraid she had already been living inside it. The truth didn't appear in a message. It didn't appear in a photo. It appeared in the way he protected his phone more carefully than he protected her feelings. Before this story begins, take a second to like and share if you've ever felt something was wrong before you had proof, because sometimes intuition notices what words try to hide. Eloria never thought she would become the kind of person who noticed small details. She used to believe trust meant not checking, not questioning, not reading into ordinary moments. She believed that if someone loved you, you wouldn't need to search for signs. But lately signs seem to appear on their own. Not dramatic signs, not obvious lies, just tiny changes that collected quietly until they became impossible to ignore. Caden had changed his habits. At first she barely noticed. He started placing his phone face down on the table. If a notification appeared, he turned the screen away naturally, almost automatically. When they sat together, his attention drifted elsewhere. His phone used to stay forgotten in his pocket while they talked. Now it never left his hand. Every vibration received immediate attention. Every message got a fast glance. Yet somehow he still answered her messages hours later. She told herself it meant nothing. People become attached to devices. Work creates pressure. But then she remembered something uncomfortable. He always said work was overwhelming, yet he never seemed exhausted when someone else texted him. One evening they finally managed to meet after days of excuses and cancellations. She expected to feel relieved. Instead, she felt like she was sitting with someone physically present, but emotionally somewhere else. They ordered food. She tried making conversation. She asked about his week. He answered politely but briefly. Then his phone lit up. His eyes moved immediately. A smile appeared. Small. Quick. Different. Not the polite smile he gave her recently. It disappeared the moment he realized she noticed. He locked the screen instantly. She looked away. She pretended she hadn't seen it, but her chest felt strangely empty. Minutes later she asked casually. Something good happened. He didn't look up. Just work. Work. Again. She nodded. But something felt wrong. She knew his work face. She knew his tired face. She knew his frustrated face. That expression had looked lighter. Warmer. During dinner she told a story, and halfway through realized he wasn't listening. His eyes dropped toward the table. His hand touched his phone again. She stopped speaking. He looked up and asked, "Sorry, what were you saying?" She smiled. Nothing important. But she remembered. Because once upon a time she had been important. After dinner they walked outside. The air was calm. For a moment she thought maybe she had imagined everything. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen and immediately stepped away. "I need to take this." She nodded. He walked farther than necessary. Not out of politeness. Out of privacy. She watched him speak quietly. Then she noticed something that hurt more than any message could. He smiled again. Not once, several times. When he returned, she asked gently, "Everything okay?" He answered too quickly. "Office issue." She didn't respond. On the way home, she replayed the evening in her mind. It wasn't the phone. It wasn't passwords. It wasn't hidden messages. It was the energy. People protect different things differently, and suddenly she wondered, when did his phone become easier to access than his emotions? The following days made everything stranger. One afternoon she sent him a message and waited. Delivered. No reply. Hours passed. Then she opened an app and noticed he had been online repeatedly. She laughed quietly, not because it was funny, because she realized she had reached the point where facts and explanations no longer matched. That night they spoke briefly. During the conversation she said lightly, "You seem happier lately." He answered immediately, "Not really. Just busy." Busy. The word had become a wall. Every question hit it and stopped. Then she asked something simple. "Can I see your latest travel photos? You said you visited several places for work." A silence appeared. He smiled awkwardly. Locked the screen. Changed the subject. In that moment she understood something she had avoided for weeks. People who hide things don't always look guilty. Sometimes they look normal, calm, familiar, until one ordinary moment reveals what effort is being spent to protect. She didn't ask again. She didn't need to, because for the first time she stopped asking herself whether she was imagining things. Instead, she asked a different question: if there was nothing to hide, why did honesty suddenly require so much distance? And if this feeling feels familiar to you, don't forget to like and share this story, because someone out there may need to hear that noticing change does not make you unreasonable. She wasn't looking for evidence. She wasn't trying to catch him. But one accidental photo revealed something she could never unsee. Before the story begins, subscribe if you enjoy emotional stories like this, because what Eloria discovered next changed everything. Eloria never planned to search for the truth. Somewhere inside her she still hoped she was wrong. She wanted all the strange feelings, delayed messages, hidden screens, and canceled plans to turn out to be stress, not betrayal. She wanted to wake up one day and laugh at herself for overthinking. So she stopped asking questions. She stopped checking if he was online. She stopped measuring reply times. She told herself that if there was something to know, life would reveal it on its own. She didn't expect that moment to arrive so quietly. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. She was sitting alone scrolling through old photos and random posts with no purpose. Her mind wasn't even on Caden anymore. Then she noticed a newly uploaded picture from someone she followed casually. It was taken at a place she recognized immediately. A modern cafe with warm lights and large windows. She almost kept scrolling. Then something pulled her back. There was someone in the background, not centered, not posing, just caught naturally in the frame. She looked once. Then again. Her hand stopped moving. The man in the photo wore a jacket she knew too well. She zoomed in. The image blurred. She moved her fingers and adjusted the screen. Her heartbeat became louder than the room around her. It looked like Caden. Not perfectly clear, but familiar enough that her stomach tightened instantly. She stared longer. Across from him sat a woman. Her face wasn't fully visible, but what caught Eloria's attention wasn't who the woman was. It was the way Caden looked. Relaxed, smiling, present. It wasn't the expression of someone exhausted from work. It wasn't the face she had been receiving lately through short calls and tired messages. She locked the screen immediately. Her first reaction wasn't anger. It was rejection. No, she had to be mistaken. People look alike. Jackets repeat. Cafes are crowded. She put her phone away and tried doing something else. 10 minutes later, she opened the photo again. This time she looked at details. The watch. The posture. The way his hand rested near the table. Tiny things she would never normally notice, but suddenly she knew. Not with proof, not with certainty, but with that strange feeling people get when reality arrives before confirmation. She closed the app and sat silently. Minutes later, her phone lit up. A message from Caden. Long day. Still at work. She looked at the text, then looked back at the photo. Her chest felt cold. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened their previous conversations. Weeks of busy. Weeks of canceled plans. Weeks of delayed replies. Suddenly, every explanation returned and stood beside that image. She typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, she sent, "Hope your day ends soon." He replied almost instantly, "Thanks. I miss you." She stared at those words for a long time. Not because they felt sweet, because they felt late. That night she couldn't sleep. She replayed everything. The shorter calls, the hidden phone, the strange smile, the disappearing weekends, the office stories that never had details. For the first time she stopped asking whether she trusted him. Instead, she asked whether she trusted herself. The next day she opened the photo one more time, and then she noticed something she had missed. On the table was a small dessert. She remembered suddenly. Months ago she had suggested going to that cafe together because people said the desserts were good. Caden had said he was too busy. She stared at the image until she laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because reality sometimes arrives in small ways. Not with confessions, not with dramatic discoveries. Sometimes the truth sits in the background of someone else's picture. She didn't confront him. Not yet. She didn't save the image. She didn't send it to anyone. She simply placed her phone down and realized something important. If she needed to collect clues to feel secure, then something had already broken long before the truth appeared. And in that moment, she understood that what frightened her most was no longer the possibility that he was lying. It was the possibility that she had been accepting less love than she deserved. If this story made you curious about what happens next, don't forget to subscribe, because the next discovery won't come from a photo. It will come from a conversation that can't be taken back. She thought the hardest part would be finding the truth. She was wrong. The hardest part was watching someone deny it while looking directly into her eyes. Before you hear what happened next, leave a comment with your opinion. Would you confront someone with only a feeling or wait until you had undeniable proof? Eloria didn't confront Caden immediately after seeing the photo. Not because she was afraid of the answer, but because she already knew one thing once the question was asked: nothing would return to normal. For days she carried the conversation in her head. She imagined him laughing and explaining everything. She imagined herself apologizing for doubting him. She imagined relief. But she also imagined silence. She imagined excuses. She imagined seeing confirmation in his eyes before hearing it in his words. Eventually she realized something uncomfortable. She was no longer waiting to understand him. She was waiting to see whether he would choose honesty. So she asked if they could meet. His reply came later than usual. Busy this week. She stared at the message and answered simply, then make time. Several minutes passed before he agreed. They met in a quiet place. Nothing dramatic. No rain. No emotional music. Just two people sitting across from each other, pretending nothing had changed. Caden arrived and smiled normally. Too normally. He asked about her day. He asked if she had eaten. For a brief moment she wondered if she had imagined everything. Then she noticed it again. His phone remained face down beside his hand. Always close, always protected. She took a breath and decided not to circle around the subject anymore. Can I ask you something? He nodded. Of course. She looked at him for a second, longer than usual. Are you really busy with work? He smiled immediately, too quickly. What kind of question is that? She kept her voice calm. Just answer me. He leaned back. Yeah. Why? She looked down briefly before speaking. Because lately it feels like you're somewhere else. His expression changed for less than a second, then disappeared. You're thinking too much again. She expected that answer. She had heard it too many times, but this time she didn't move away from the question. Then help me understand. He sighed. I don't know what you want me to say. She stayed quiet, then asked softly, last weekend, where were you? He answered instantly. Work. No pause. No thinking. She nodded once. All day, yeah. She looked at him and asked the question she had carried for days. Then why did I see a photo of someone who looked exactly like you sitting in a cafe? For the first time silence appeared. Not confusion. Not surprise. Silence. He looked away briefly. Then laughed lightly. Seriously, she waited. You're accusing me because of a random photo. She didn't raise her voice. I'm asking. He crossed his arms. People look similar. She nodded. Maybe. He relaxed slightly. Then she added quietly. The jacket was the same. His eyes shifted. She continued. The watch too. Another pause. She wasn't trying to trap him. She was watching. Watching whether he would tell the truth if given space. He shook his head. You're becoming paranoid. The sentence landed differently than she expected. Not because it hurt, but because she suddenly realized something. He still wasn't asking what she felt. He wasn't asking why she was worried. He was defending before understanding. She looked at him carefully and asked one last question. If I'm wrong, can you show me? His expression froze. Only briefly. Then he smiled again. Show you what? That nothing's happening. He looked away. Picked up his phone, locked it. Put it back down. I don't think I should have to prove myself. And that was the moment something changed. Not because he refused, but because she realized she would have shown him immediately if their positions were reversed. She sat quietly, then smiled softly. Okay. He looked surprised. Okay. She nodded. I understand. They talked a little longer after that. Ordinary conversation, safe subjects. But she stopped listening. Because the answer she needed had already arrived. Not through confession. Not through evidence. But through avoidance. When they stood up to leave, he asked, Are we okay? She looked at him for a moment and answered honestly, I don't know. And for the first time she realized she wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. She was afraid of staying where truth had to be negotiated. Before you leave, comment your opinion below. Do you think silence can reveal more than words? Or do you believe she should have waited longer? Sometimes betrayal doesn't begin with a confession. Sometimes it begins the moment someone stops fighting to keep your trust. Eloria thought she was preparing herself for the truth, but she never expected the truth to sound this calm. After their last conversation, Eloria stopped asking questions, not because she had stopped caring, but because she realized something painful. When someone truly wants to reassure you, They usually do not treat your feelings like an inconvenience. The silence after their meeting stayed with her. Caden still sent messages. Still said good morning. Still asked whether she had eaten. But something had changed. His words continued the relationship, while his actions slowly stepped outside of it. Days passed. She no longer checked whether he was online. She no longer replayed conversations. She simply observed. And strangely, once she stopped chasing answers, she started noticing more. His messages became more regular, but less personal. He said the right things, but not at the right moments. It felt less like connection and more like maintenance. Then one evening her phone rang unexpectedly. It was Caden. She answered. His voice sounded normal. Too normal. They spoke for a while about ordinary things. Then suddenly he said, "You've been quiet lately." She smiled faintly. "Have I?" He laughed. "Yeah. No questions. No overthinking." She looked out the window and answered softly. "Maybe I'm tired." There was a pause. Then he said something strange. "I didn't want things to become complicated." Her expression changed slightly. She didn't answer. He continued, "You know how work has been." Work, again. The familiar word returned. But this time she didn't interrupt. She asked calmly, "Is it really work?" Silence. "Not long. Just long enough to feel different." Then he sighed. Not irritated. Not angry. Just tired. "Why are we doing this again?" She closed her eyes briefly. "Because every time I ask, I feel like I'm speaking to someone who already left." No answer. She waited. Then she asked quietly, "Is there someone else?" The question finally existed between them. No more photos. No more guessing. No more hidden meanings. Just words. She expected denial. She expected frustration. She expected him to call her unreasonable. Instead, he stayed quiet. And somehow that silence hurt more than any lie. Seconds passed. Then he spoke. Slowly. "I didn't plan for this." Her fingers tightened around the phone. She didn't move. He continued. "Nothing happened at first." She stared ahead without seeing anything. At first another silence. Then I met someone. The room suddenly felt smaller. Not because she was shocked, but because hearing the truth sounded different from imagining it. She asked. And all this time he exhaled. "I didn't know how to tell you." She laughed once, quietly, not out of humor. "So work was easier." He didn't answer. She asked another question. "How long?" He paused. "Long enough that I should have said something earlier." She closed her eyes. There it was. Not dramatic. Not emotional. No excuses about fate. No speeches about being unhappy. Just a quiet admission that the relationship she had been protecting had already become something else. She thought she would cry. She thought she would become angry. But instead she felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because she wanted this answer, but because she was finally no longer competing with confusion. She asked one final thing. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" He didn't respond immediately. Then he said honestly, "I don't know." That answer hurt more than everything before it. Because it meant the truth hadn't been delayed by timing. It had been delayed by choice. She sat quietly. Then asked, "Does she know about me?" Another pause. "Yes." Eloria looked down and smiled sadly. That was the moment she understood something important. Betrayal isn't always choosing another person. Sometimes betrayal is letting someone continue loving you while you've already left emotionally. She thanked him for being honest. He sounded surprised. Then he asked carefully, "Are you okay?" She thought about the question, then answered, "Not right now." A pause. "But I think I will be." After the call ended, she sat in silence. No dramatic breakdown. No shouting. Just stillness. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't discovering that someone lied. It's realizing your heart already knew long before the truth arrived. She thought leaving would happen in one dramatic moment. A goodbye. A final argument. A slammed door. But when the moment finally came, it looked nothing like she imagined. Sometimes the end of love is not loud. It's the moment you realize staying hurts more than leaving. After the truth came out, Eloria expected to feel destroyed. She expected endless crying, sleepless nights, anger that refused to disappear. Instead, what she felt first was silence, a strange silence. The kind that appears after spending too long carrying something heavy and finally putting it down. The weight was gone, but her arms still remembered it. For days after the confession, she continued moving through life almost normally. She woke up, worked, answered messages, drank coffee, smiled when people spoke to her. On the outside, everything looked unchanged. But inside, something had quietly ended. Caden still sent messages. Not many. Just enough to stay present. Sometimes he asked if she was okay. Sometimes he said he was sorry. Once he even said, "I never wanted to hurt you." She stared at that sentence for a long time. Then she realized something difficult. Intentions did not erase outcomes. Someone could never want to hurt you, and still hurt you deeply. She never answered that message. Not because she hated him. She just didn't know what there was left to say. A few days later, he asked if they could meet. She thought about refusing. But another part of her wanted to see whether there was anything left to hold on to. They met in the same calm way their last conversations had happened. No drama, no scene. He looked tired. She noticed that immediately. For a moment, she remembered all the versions of him she had loved. The version who stayed on calls late at night. The version who remembered small details. The version who once made her feel chosen. It hurt to realize people can become strangers without disappearing. They sat down. He spoke first. "I know I handled everything badly." She nodded. He continued. "I didn't know how to end things." She looked at him quietly. Then asked what he looked down. She already knew the answer. But she wanted to hear whether he did. He said softly, "Us." The word felt strange, not painful, just unfamiliar. She sat silently for a while, then asked something she hadn't asked before. "When did you stop choosing this relationship?" He looked surprised. He thought for a moment, then answered honestly, "I don't know." She nodded slowly. That answer told her everything, because relationships rarely end in one moment. Sometimes they end quietly, while both people still pretend they're trying. She looked at him and realized she had been grieving long before this conversation. She had grieved through canceled plans, through short replies, through emotional distance, through unanswered questions. This wasn't the beginning of loss. It was the end of waiting. He looked at her and said carefully, "I don't want to lose you completely." She smiled softly. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. "You already did." He looked away. She continued, "Not because of her." He looked back. She said quietly, "Because you stopped being here before you left." Silence. He nodded once. She stood still for a moment and realized something unexpected. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want explanations anymore. She didn't want him to suddenly realize her value and come back. She just wanted peace. She took a breath and said words she never thought she would say. "I think I need to let this go." His expression changed. "Are you sure?" She smiled gently. "No." Then after a pause, "But I think staying hurts more." He looked at her for a long moment and said, "I'm sorry." She believed he meant it. And strangely, that didn't change anything, because apologies can explain pain, but they cannot undo it. She picked up her bag. Before leaving, she looked at him one last time. Not trying to memorize him. Not hoping he would stop her. Just accepting reality. Then she said quietly, "I hope you become honest before someone else has to question themselves the way I did." She turned and walked away. No dramatic music, no running back, no final message. Just one person choosing herself after spending too long waiting to be chosen. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel empty. It felt unknown. And unknown suddenly felt better than staying somewhere she was no longer loved the same way. Thank you for listening to this story, until the final chapter. If stories like this stay with you, don't forget to subscribe and continue the journey together. Everyone thinks the hardest part is being betrayed. But sometimes the hardest part is waking up the next morning and realizing life continues, and now you have to decide who you become next. After walking away, Eloria expected to feel broken. She thought there would be a dramatic moment where everything collapsed at once. But life did something unexpected. It kept moving. The next morning still arrived. Sunlight still entered the room. Notifications still appeared. People still asked ordinary questions. And somehow that felt strange. Because when something important ends inside you, the world outside doesn't stop to acknowledge it. For the first few days, she moved slowly. Not because she couldn't function, but because she no longer wanted to rush herself into feeling okay. She stopped pretending she was unaffected. She stopped explaining the breakup differently to protect his image. She stopped telling herself stories that made the ending easier to accept. She simply admitted something honest. She was hurt. And strangely, the moment she admitted that, things became lighter. She noticed how much energy she had spent trying to understand someone who had already made their choice. She remembered the late nights replaying conversations, the endless attempts to become more patient, more understanding, less demanding. She realized she had quietly turned herself into someone smaller, just to fit inside a relationship that no longer had room for her. That thought stayed with her. One afternoon, she opened her phone and saw old messages. She expected sadness. Instead, she felt distance. Not because the memories were fake. They weren't. There had been real moments, real laughter, real care. But she understood something new. Something can be real and still not last forever. She closed the messages and did something she hadn't done in a long time. She went outside with no plan. She walked without checking her phone. She sat somewhere and watched people passing by. Nobody knew her story. Nobody knew she had spent weeks questioning herself. The world didn't know, and somehow that became comforting, because she realized she didn't need everyone to understand her in order to move forward. Days became calmer. She started returning to things she had forgotten. Music she liked, places she wanted to visit, small routines that belonged only to her. She stopped measuring her worth by how much effort someone gave her. She stopped asking whether she had been enough. Because eventually she understood the question had always been wrong. Love is not proven by exhausting yourself to become impossible to leave. One evening she looked in the mirror and noticed something surprising. She looked like herself again. Not happier, not healed, just present. She smiled a little, then laughed because she remembered how desperately she once wanted answers. Now she realized answers mattered less than acceptance. She thought about Caden. Not with anger anymore. Not with hope either. Just gratitude for one thing: the truth arrived, before she lost herself completely. She hoped he would become honest one day. She hoped nobody else would stay in confusion longer than necessary. But she no longer felt responsible for teaching him that lesson. Then she opened her notes app and wrote a sentence for herself. Leaving did not mean I failed. It meant I finally listened. She read it again, and quietly put the phone away. Time passed. The memories stayed but changed shape. They stopped feeling like wounds and started feeling like chapters. And she understood something she wished she had known earlier: healing doesn't always feel powerful. Sometimes healing looks ordinary. Eating again. Sleeping better. Laughing unexpectedly. Making plans without checking whether someone else is available. Choosing yourself quietly. One day she realized she had gone an entire afternoon without thinking about what she could have done differently. She smiled. Not because she forgot, but because she no longer needed to carry it. If someone had told her at the beginning that she would survive this, she wouldn't have believed them. But here she was. Not unchanged, not untouched, just stronger in quieter ways. And if you stayed until this final part, remember, this: sometimes losing the wrong person is how you return to yourself. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories that remind us that endings are not always failures. Sometimes they're the beginning of finally choosing ourselves.